Reena Ninan is an American TV broadcaster. She's a podcast host, and she is also in running a company called Good Trouble Productions. Hi, Reena. How you doing?
Hey, Dana, great to be with you.
Did I get all that right?
Got all that right.
Good.
Well done. Well done.
Help me walk through what's happening in the U.S. right now. Some pretty ordinary and yet, when you look at the width and breadth of it, extraordinary scenes coming from not only the UCLA overnight, but other universities and colleges where police are, raiding those colleges and arresting students, pro-Palestinian demonstrations.
I think the big news, everyone really has been captivated by Columbia University, and we've seen New York Police Department, this week, just in the past couple of days, arrest close to 300 people who had been inside of this hall for days, essentially. And they had three big demands. One, they wanted the university to divest from Israel. They wanted to know more transparency on who and what the university is invested in. And third, they wanted amnesty. They wanted no disciplinary action for their actions with these protests and this lock-in into this university hall. What I found fascinating are two other universities overnight. Northwestern University and Brown University have actually come up with agreements with these students. And in Northwestern, it's fascinating. They in these cases have agreed to allow one tent sort of symbolically on campus, and they're going to allow more Palestinian students. They're going to fund for a couple years two Palestinian professors. And Brown University is going to also have a committee that'll allow students to have an open discussion and dialogue with university officials on divestment, on who and what they are invested in. Uh, it's a fascinating, hopefully, an end for these universities, because what has captivated the world are the sometimes violent images that have come out of this. And New York Police Department has said that it's their belief that some of these protesters, they were outside influence, including people who had taken part in Occupy Wall Street in 2020.
Yeah, I mean that's where it takes a turn, doesn't it? Because I mean a lot of it is routine in the sense that these are students who feel rightly or wrongly that the Palestinian cause is worth supporting and that the U.S. administration shouldn't be supporting Israel. And they talk about the divestment from arms manufacturing and some of those companies that you mentioned. And yet you have the arrests at Columbia where one of the intelligence officials with the NYPD then made the case in front of the mayor as well, right? And with the mayor's support, that this was more sinister than just students at Columbia, that these protesters, quote unquote, have been influenced by external actors who are unaffiliated with the university, some of whom have been known to our department and others for many years. They're dangerous, disruptive, and criminally activity associated with protests for years. Is that just justifying the police going in there in a very muscular way, or do we? I guess it remains to be seen when those people go to court really who they were.
I do believe that what we saw in New York, there were some outside actors, because it turned so violent in there were some violent moments, I do believe. Um, was the use of force justified? I think that's a question that many universities have to grapple with over and over again. University of Texas, there's one journalism professor early on last week who said that I saw a Facebook post saying that he had interviewed 50 of the people who it was just a simple sit-in. They were just totally nonviolent sitting in. And Texas had brought in all of these police officers. And the professor was saying they have a right to be able to protest peacefully. It's a sit-in, and these were all university students. I interviewed all of them. I think what happens is people from the outside or other outside actors can sometimes come into these universities, and that's where the blurring of the line happens. But is the force justified on campuses? They see one thing and then they start to think the other. It is a very complicated situation.
Yeah.
I was last week on the campus of George Washington University for a board meeting, and I have to say that it popped up overnight, largely peaceful, students on campus. But where the university drew the line was they made it very clear anybody from the outside, including the neighboring schools like American or Georgetown, anybody coming onto campus to protest will be considered trespassers. And I think part of it was because they're seeing the outside influence from other universities, and they said, you on campus can protest peacefully, but we're not letting this get out of hand. And then we saw the reverse. The DC Police Department refused to come in and step in when they were called as well. So it's become so politicized. I was happy to see that some sort of deal was reached with Northwestern and Brown University because it has gotten out of hand in many college campuses, but you also want to balance the right to freedom of speech and ability to protest in a peaceful way.
And we don't know who on the pro-Israeli side. A lot of them were wearing masks when they were clashing with pro-Palestinian demonstrators, and it got very violent. It's one of the reasons why the police came into UCLA in the end,
Mhm.
who they were. And so while you may say that, not all the Palestinian, not you, but while it's being said that some of the pro-Palestinian demonstrators may in fact not be students and may be connected to other movements and criminal, with criminal past. I mean, you question who were these pro-Israeli demonstrators as well. So it does seem like, I mean, the vast majority of them are students, but there were outside influencers in there trying to light a fire, and kick off a powder cake. So what is the Biden administration, when you talk about it's become so political, what are they doing wrong?
I think part of it started in the beginning because I think there was a misjudgment of the Arab streets and Arab streets. I mean, some of the Arab streets also in America. Very quickly, this became not just about the Palestinian people, but as one person said, we don't care if you're Sunni or Shiite. This is an issue that affects all Muslims, and we feel solidarity. But it went further than that. It wasn't just an Arab American thing. We saw college universities, and in some cases, students who might not even know the history fully of the region because it's so complicated, feel like this is the underdog. The Hamas official numbers, according to them, was 35,000 killed, and that these atrocities should not be allowed to happen. And this is America. You should have the right, and you do have the right to peacefully protest, but it can't come at the expense of other people's safety and security. That's determined already. And if you look at the Israeli people, Dana, as you know, they've been for 2 years protesting judicial changes that Benjamin Netanyahu's government has tried to put forward. They're protesting even the government itself. And they're also protesting, demanding. They really have one demand from what I've seen over and over again: releasing the hostages. Over and over again, polling has showed they are willing to sacrifice and give up a lot. No, people in jail, people with blood on their hands, they want those Israelis back, period. And that has been the big focus. And I think there's a big divide between people pushing to get the hostages out and a disconnect with the Netanyahu government, who they feel isn't doing enough.
Right. And you have the Biden administration going back to American politics, pushing for some kind of resolution and ceasefire now,
They have been pushing for a
hoping
while. Yeah.
hoping that Hamas will take the deal. Um, uh, Blinken calling on Hamas, you've got to take this deal now. It's a pretty good chance they're not going to take it at all, and that this is going to continue on through the election season in America, and it's not going to help Biden in any way.
I mean, and politically, I think, of course they want this war to end, but I think also there's a big political calculus that you can't ignore. I think the fact that Hamas keeps saying no over and over again, in many ways, Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, who helped orchestrate this entire elaborate massacre, and uh, Benjamin Netanyahu have very similar fates. When this war ends, both of them will have to face the current situation at hand. For Netanyahu, if his coalition falls apart and he strikes some deal with Hamas, is it over for him? He's got a series of trials against him on political corruption and all sorts of other issues with the failure of intelligence and his leadership when these attacks happened. And then Sinwar, you look at someone like him, what happens to him after all this? The political leadership of Hamas sitting in Qatar will probably have a very different take. He's the one orchestrating things on the ground. So if the movement is to completely remove Hamas leadership in the Gaza Strip, he's the first person people would want to remove.
How realistic is Israel's goal of removing Hamas? You've been to Gaza, so have I, and you know that Hamas is not only popular in Gaza, but now its popularity has spiked in the West Bank too.
I think it's almost impossible, only because as I spoke to one, not political Gazan, he's just a person down the middle who I've trusted. He said to me, "What happens to all those people who have been removed from their homes, whose homes have been completely flattened, who have lost their mothers and their grandmothers and their sisters and their sons?" And he goes, "You don't forget that." And so what I do worry is no matter how Hamas is removed, if it's at all possible, the ideology remains and they have patience. One of the things that have always stood out to me is Osama bin Laden said when he saw the Hezbollah bombing of the Marine barracks in the early 1980s in Lebanon, that was the kernel planted in his heart for 9/11. He knew that something even more spectacular was possible. And I wonder how many other bin Ladens have that kernel planted in their heart after this Gaza war.
There's a real fueling of extremism. It's not the Israeli wish is that all of this pain and suffering in Gaza eventually removes, makes people less extreme because they are suffering, their families are suffering or eliminated, and they realize that their future maybe is not with Hamas, which started all of this by entering Israel, but the reality may be that they rally around Hamas.
Yes.
Just hating Israel all the more. The headline in Ynet News today sort of caught my attention. It says, "All eyes on Rafah, Israel's dilemma. Netanyahu faces tough choice, launch a full-scale offensive in southern Gaza, dealing with 1 million displaced for total victory, or maintain ties with key allies, and normalize relations with Saudi Arabia. No easy options." There's never an easy option.
And this entire war, since October 7th has been fully about goals that have not been realized. It's to make Israel safe, is what they said. They went into Gaza, but they've made Jews across the entire world less safe, including, it doesn't matter where you are, you don't have to live in Israel. What's also been interesting to me, Dana, was speaking to small business owners in the West Bank before this attack happened in August and September. I was just talking to some friends, and there was great dissatisfaction back then with Mahmoud Abbas. They just felt that there is no movement in the economy because of him,
Yeah.
because
And the
they
polls
feel
say like 95%
this is
of
before
Palestinians
October.
want Abbas to leave.
Overwhelmingly in the West Bank, they would prefer a Hamas government over Abbas. And it is because they feel that he's in many ways a puppet to the Israelis. He's not doing enough on the settler violence, and he's not doing enough to grow the economy. They feel like he has become the fat cat. His family has all the money and it's not trickling down. And that is a grave and serious problem that needs to be addressed. I do not believe there is a future Palestinian state with Mahmoud Abbas as a leader.
But there's probably not a future Palestinian state without somebody moderate, because Israelis will not agree. I mean, they will say, we left Gaza. It turned into a military platform to launch attacks against Israel. Now you want us to turn over the West Bank. It's some kind of two-state solution, a proposal by the international community, and do what? Allow them to arm, allow them to tunnel, allow them to do this to us in another 5 or 10 years. I mean, Israelis themselves cannot, even if they were pro-peace in the 90s, they can't. This is probably the last moment that they want to hear anything about Palestinian autonomy and a two-state solution.
You're absolutely right. And even the people who are left of left, that I've known over the years have said to me, nobody, it is, you can't even begin to talk about a two-state solution until those hostages are back. Nobody. He goes, no peacenik, no person who's left of left. Nobody wants to talk about that until we get them home, period. And that was sort of a wake-up call to me that you can't move forward on this issue. But status quo is no longer an option either. Like there has to be something big that's done. I do still believe when this war ends at the possibility of Saudi normalization of relations with Israel. I think they were the closest they've ever been. And I do think it's a big priority for the Biden administration. It seems like a very tall task to get that done before elections. But I do think it's something the Saudis do want. But optically, they can't do with people getting slaughtered in Gaza or, an onslaught into Rafah short, in the coming weeks, potentially.
I mean, I was kind of reflecting myself on how do you take this very dark moment and somehow light a path to some kind of diplomatic solution to the conflict. And it seems to me that it never mind public opinion and polling, that will come later. It requires really visionary leaders and moderates on both sides, because both sides are suffering from a lack of those, to stand up and say, this is the way, and this is how we're going to live side by side. But at the same time, I have a pretty good memory. We went through that in the Oslo Accords.
Hmm.
And so who is it? I mean, who suddenly deals with de-radicalization on the Palestinian side and on the Israeli side too? I mean, there's a radical right there, as you well know, from Kahana High. Some of them are in cabinet. It's going to require a change of political leadership on both sides and some kind of visionary leaders that will come forward and say, we're going to do this. We're going to shake hands. We're going to sign an agreement, implement some kind of phased plan to de-escalate all of this, de-radicalized, and then, maybe there'll be a Palestinian state, an armed one. I don't know.
I was reminded when the Japanese prime minister's wife came to the White House recently. And, when you don't live through history, it could have happened in the dinosaur era. You don't feel it, you don't understand it fully. But I can't understand a moment in US history with such horrific relations with the Japanese, and a generation later, seeing them welcomed into the White House, seeing business opportunity in the sector grow. I do believe it is possible. I do believe it comes at a great price. You look at Sadat, you look at Rabin, you look at the great political price they paid with their lives in the end. Um, I just am one who is not big on predictions. All I can say with definitive certainty is something drastic has to change, because this next generation that is up and coming won't tolerate it in the US, globally, in Gaza, and in Israel. So, if anything for them, I just am listening very closely to the younger generation, and what they are saying. And I think there is hope. They do tell me they believe things are possible. And I think when you're younger, you have so much hope and vision about what the future can be, which is good. But there's no question, you're right, Dana. Drastic measures need to be taken, and there has to be significant change, because the current status quo is no longer sustainable.
That's a great way to end. And so thank you, Reena. And I know for people that don't know Reena, she was based in Jerusalem and has been to Gaza and the West Bank, as all of us
And with
have
you
so
throughout the
many
Middle
times.
East and Iraq, with you right by my side. So I'm grateful for all the opportunities where we got to work together too, Dana.
Great to talk to you. Thanks, Reena.
Thank you.